Yes. Very. I can assure you it would have been my 5th quarantine in the last 12 months. So I think it's tremendous, and I think that's a demonstration of what Australia's achieved. As I said, today not only is New South Wales and Victoria and the ACT at 80% double vaccinated for those aged over 16, but the whole country will be past that 80% mark over the course of today, and when we get the figures tomorrow, I'm quite certain that will be confirmed. And as we meet together, the premiers and chief ministers and I later today, that will be a moment to reflect on. I mean, we've achieved that in the first week of November. That means we overcame all the challenges that we had with supplies that didn't show up from Europe and things like that, and we've pushed through and we've got it sorted. And I particularly want to commend General Fruin for the great job that he has done, supported by, of course, Professor Murphy and Greg Hunt, and here in New South Wales, Brad Hazzard, and all of them. Achieving that 80% milestone here in Australia in this time frame, Australians have rolled up their sleeves. They've kept their part of the bargain, and governments are keeping their part of the bargain, and that's why I can join with you today. Sorry? Well, what's most important, whether it's in WA or Queensland, is they need to get those vaccination rates up to those marks. And now, until you hit those marks, then those opportunities that are now being realised here in Sydney and across New South Wales and Victoria and the ACT, well, those same things can be enjoyed in Western Australia and in Queensland. So the real task is to get those vaccination rates to those same levels we're seeing in other states. And, those numbers are lifting. They obviously haven't moved as quickly as they have in New South Wales and Victoria and the ACT. But if we keep driving forward on that, I'm particularly pleased to see how the 12 to 15-year-olds vaccination rates have lifted. Kids are back at school. How good's that? How good's that?
A bloody relief.
Comparison between the states, why has it gone faster in New South Wales and Victoria than Queensland? What do you think the reason is?
Well, look, I think an obvious part of it has been the third wave that hit New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT. I think that's a very fair assessment. And, when you're in a state where there's been effectively no COVID, there's a different level of urgency in that state compared to what happened here in New South Wales. And, we understood that. I mean, New South Wales was facing the worst of that third wave, and that's why we were able to secure those additional doses, those Polish doses. I was very pleased to see the Polish Prime Minister in Glasgow, and to thank him very much, particularly on behalf of people in New South Wales, because when I spoke to him, it's what I said to him. I said, we've got a real big challenge here in our biggest city, and this will really help us to be able to try and break the back of the challenge we had here in Sydney, and that's indeed what happened. And so I was very grateful to him, and of course the UK government, to Boris and everyone there, and Sajid Javid, that really helped us break through here in New South Wales. And that breakthrough in New South Wales led to the breakthrough in Victoria, the breakthrough in the ACT, and I believe it will lead to the breakthrough right across the country. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I believe it is. President Widodo and I did have a good discussion about that. He is really pleased that Australians are travelling again. Just as pleased as Prime Minister Bainimarama is about people travelling to Fiji, and the Pacific Island leaders who I met with overseas are very thrilled about that. You can imagine what that's going to mean to their local economies, and the same is true in Indonesia. So they're looking to see how they can reduce the number of days that would be required when anyone, or particularly Australians, are going into Bali, and I would expect over time to see that fall, but they're obviously being cautious about that, and that is entirely appropriate for them. But as we know, on the 21st, I was able to announce when I met with Prime Minister Lee that we'll have that open arrangement with Singapore from the 21st of this month. And what that is showing is, particularly here in New South Wales, we're just taking it step by step and demonstrating how this works, giving Australians confidence all around the country that this is working, that we're opening up the economy. We've got $110 billion worth of infrastructure that we want to see get built. And for that to happen, the country has to be open, ports have to be opening and working well, and we'll be focusing a lot on that issue as well. We've moved on from that issue. That's what I said when I was in Dubai.
In terms of hospitality industry suffering critical shortages,
Yes.
is it time to be open to tourist backpacks to capitalise on the economic boom Australia reopens?
Yeah, I know the Premier wants to speak about this, and we share a view about this. I'm keen to see that happen. I'm keen to see it happen this year in whatever stage format we can, and I think it's going to be particularly important for our agricultural workforce. We're already moving quite well on our Pacific programs for workers. We've got the new agricultural visas as well. I spoke to President Widodo about that and ensuring that Indonesia could participate strongly in our agricultural visa program, and there was keen interest in that. But as we're now in economic recovery mode, in fact beyond that, we're in growth mode with our economy. Realising that means we've now got to deal with the supply side challenges we're going to have, and that is in the labour markets, it is on the ports, it is ensuring that our cities are functioning well, which is why the timeliness of projects like this is so important. Coming out of COVID, we need to be removing those blockages, ensuring that red tape is not going to dry up investment or stymie investment. We've got to get on with the clean energy technology changes that we're putting in place and developing all that. But Dom, I'm sure you want to talk about that.
Well, let's begin by saying that it's a better problem to have than high unemployment. And the good news about some of these shortages is it provides an opportunity for people right across the state to get into work. And in a challenging time over the last 2 years, we lost close to 300,000 jobs last year, recovered every single one of them in this state, plus 30,000 more. We've had a challenging time during Delta. We want to get everybody back into paid work, and the financial stimulus by the federal and state government here has allowed us to provide opportunities for businesses to remain open, for our workers to remain paid in what's been a challenging time. Now, in relation to labour shortages, it's a serious issue. It's a major issue facing our state. The Commonwealth governments and the Prime Minister's completely across that. As he has pointed out, we made some substantial changes in relation to agricultural visas. That was most important because we didn't want to have, after droughts and bushfires in our state, a situation where our produce was left to rot on the ground. And that's been crucial in ensuring that regional New South Wales continues to recover from the pandemic. But obviously in the hospitality sectors and those other areas where shortages are, we need to address that. We'll continue to work closely with the federal government. As the Prime Minister has said, it's a staged process. By ending quarantine for fully vaccinated people in Sydney, that has been a great start. Obviously with returning Australians, that then moves to other areas, and we need to ensure as we move through this period that businesses have the support. The other thing that's important as well is we've had pretty flat wage growth in this state and across the country for a sustained period of time. There's great opportunity now for our workers who are sitting at home to get out, get a job and get paid well.
Well, the decision we made to go ahead with those was not a short-term decision. I will never forget that first weekend when the events of Wuhan had become very clear and there were planes on their way to Australia from Wuhan that weekend. And it's important that in the future, for whatever pandemic we may face in the future, that we have that initial bank of facilities. In Victoria, and that one's progressing well. We've changed the scale of the one in Queensland and Western Australia. So at 3 points, we can ensure that there are facilities in place at those arrangements. So that was not, from our point of view, as much about dealing with the current situation, although it can, particularly in Victoria, provide some support, because we're still quarantining unvaccinated Australians coming back into the country. That is still the case. And that can present some challenges, so that I think, provides a positive contribution. But this is about a longer-term capability. And they have been built to be multi-use facilities as well. So they had their own longer-term, not just their shorter-term advantages.
Last question.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear. Well, as we announced today, we're going to keep the block funding arrangements in place out to the end of this year, and we've extended out also some time ago the COVID arrangements, which are 50-50 arrangements. We have the National Health Reform Agreement, which provides record funding into hospitals. But I've got to say, and I'm sure Dom might want to comment on this as well, but when we were looking at the modelling for what the impact on our hospitals would be, and tremendous work was done collaboratively at a federal state level to really understand all the scenarios that we might face in terms of the pressure on the hospitals. Those worst fears have not been realised. The worst case, and they weren't even the worst case scenarios, there were far worst case scenarios we had to be mindful of. And it reminded me a lot of that early part of the pandemic when we were preparing for the absolute worst and thankful for the best. And I think that's what we're seeing now. We were prepared for the worst, and we're thankful for what is one of the best results that we're seeing. I've, over the last couple of days, had the opportunity to share experiences with other countries who've been going through this, and a lot of their experiences have been very similar. So it is, we have put in place the plans to deal with the surges here in New South Wales and Victoria, and I commend the Victorian government as well. They've planned well, and that, I think, gives a lot of confidence to Queensland, and where there hasn't been the big number of cases for them to deal with, and in Western Australia and others, which will eventually, when their borders open up, face some demand on their system. But I think the states in New South Wales and Victoria, that it can all be managed well, you plan well, we've modelled it and worked through those issues, and I think that has been a good result. But Dom, I think you've had a similar experience.
Well, I think it's one of the untold stories of the pandemic was initially from the outset we invested record amounts in our health system. And I remember saying to the health minister at the time, whatever you need financially, you will have to ensure our public health system particularly was ready for the worst case scenario. Now, we didn't go anywhere near that, but that's been a substantial benefit to our health system here in our state. And we're incredibly confident as challenges come our way moving forward. And the pandemic is not over. As we open up, case numbers will increase, hospitalisations will increase, we know that, but we're ready. And ultimately,